is like overcomplicating content, right? And overcomplicating content creation. I think a lot of times people are like, is this going to be valuable? Like, how do I create the value? How do I do, but how does that connect to a sale? And I think if you just focus on solving the problems that, your audience has, and there's a lot of different ways to do this, right? There's the type of person that is on the hero's journey. So maybe your business was something that you struggled with and you eventually came up with a solution and found your way back through that. And now you're going back and teaching other people that are struggling with the same problem you used to have, right?
Hey, everybody, welcome to the Levelin Up podcast with Brigham Blackham. I've got my new friend, Giana Cambria here. We are so excited to have her on today. She's from Upper Hand Creative, absolutely an amazing content creator. And she is someone that knows how to avoid some of the biggest mistakes in content creation. We're going to have such a fun conversation today. We're going to be able to really understand how to really expand our opportunities with content creation and grow our businesses while we're doing that. So Giana, how are you doing today?
I'm good, Brigham. Thank you so much for having me. Excited to be here.
Oh, absolutely. It is a pleasure to have you on today. Now, let's first start off a little bit more with your background. If it's all right, I'm gonna actually share my screen really quick. I have everyone send me these little background things, a little bit about them. So let me first share a little bit about her. So she's a founder of Upper Hand Creative. She's streamlined over 200 businesses and their content. Even in one of them, she helped make over $2 million profit for a major brand, and she's a keynote speaker. So just to give you a little bit of context of how awesome Giana is, I am so grateful to have you on today. And I would love to hear a little bit more of your background when it comes to like saying, hey, this is what I'm passionate about. This is what I care about in small business. Let's start there.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that great introduction. Short of it is, I don't think I ever really wanted to be an entrepreneur. Somehow I ended up here, and I think like a lot of us here, it started with just a insatiable desire for freedom, right? I just knew that I didn't want to be on anybody else's time clock or any of that. And so it kind of led me down this path, but I was always a really quiet kid, right? I like to put my head down, do the work, right? I didn't like to put myself out there. And I honestly was overlooked for a lot of opportunities because of that, right? Whether it was like in my day job or whatever I was doing, I just like any facet of it growing up. And so when I got into business, it was no different, right? So I was like, I'm just going to put my head down, keep working. If I put up a really beautiful website, people will come. If I build it, they will come. After a few short months, you realize that's not the case. And so for me, content really changed the game. Once I, as uncomfortable as I was, once I started putting video content out there, that is ultimately what changed everything for us. And up to that point, nothing was really working. And I think I just, different moments in time where I was putting pieces together and had this realization that visibility piece, and just by getting on video, you can leverage what a lot of these speakers are doing, right? The minute you see somebody on stage, there's instant credibility. The minute you see somebody on video, it's no different. And we all have this at our fingertips now when it comes to social media and YouTube and all these different things, and our iPhones with amazing Hollywood grade cameras in our pocket, right? And so it's never been easier. And I think like that's my passion, is just one, how do we make this super easy as a business owner for you to do that and get that visibility, but knowing that this is truly the linchpin to everything.
Oh, I love that. Now, one of the things I think is really creative about what you do is you'll take like 4 hours in a month and you'll say, we're going to compress these 4 hours and get multiple pieces of content from it. Can you talk to us about what that is? Because it seems like way too easy, but I love how you go and you create such great content from honestly a short amount of investment time. So let's start there.
Yeah. So our foundation is really on long form content first. And I think we're starting to see some of this come back around, but I think there's been all this noise about short form. Nobody has attention spans. If you want to go viral, it's got to be short form. And where that does definitely have a place, I think for a business owner, the very first thing you should have in place are really dialed in long form assets. And the beautiful thing about that is exactly what you said, is you don't have to overcomplicate it, right? You have some sort of expertise or something that people are naturally gravitating towards you for. And if you just share that in whatever way is comfortable for you on video, that becomes your long form asset. But the conversions happen in long form, right? So we always start there. And then the cool thing about that is that can easily be repurposed into short form. And it also takes the pressure off you. You don't have to be funny or entertaining or come up with these creative things or go talk to people on the street, right, in order to get attention anymore. So
I love that. So you're taking a focus on this long form and saying, well, we're first going to start there, make sure that this is dialed in, and then you can cut it up and put it into smaller form things after the fact.
Right.
Right.
Yeah,
That's awesome.
exactly.
Well, one of the things I also noticed that you do is you really are great at dialing in on trends, and you kind of borrow other people's audiences at times. I've noticed in your videos, sometimes you'll be like, hey, here's something that Gary Vee does, or here, like I love watching your stuff when it's talking about, here's how you can recognize these patterns. So what are some of the best patterns that you've recognized in content creation?
Yeah. And I think that is one of the easiest ways for new creators to come on board is take hold of the people that are, already doing it in your industry, that are influencers, that are well-known names. And just by you giving your perspective on something, now you, like exactly what you said, you've borrowed their audience, right? And you have a little bit of credibility doing that as well. So it's a great way to start. One of the things that we're seeing though is like when we're working with a new client, my goal is always to figure out what is the easy button for you for content. Because I think, and I know we're going to get into like mistakes and that sort of thing here in a minute, but I think one of the biggest mistakes we always see is it's so easy to go look at, Alex Hormozi or Ryan Pineda or Ryan Serhan or all these guys out there or girls that are doing content at a very high level. And one, we just forget that they didn't always start there. That was not always the case. Go back, whatever it was, 3.5, 4 years ago, Hormozi had no followers, right? Had no Instagram game, no YouTube. So I think number one, remembering that that's not where they started. So if you just go look at what they're doing and you try to copy it, right, you're going to show up inauthentically. Number one, you're trying to be something that you're not. And so what we do is we say, okay, how do you deliver your expertise already? Are you comfortable do you want to screen share? Do you have a PowerPoint slide? Is that your natural MO, right? Or are you conversational? Should we put you in an interview setting, right? So how can we get you comfortable in a normal environment already where you can just show up as the expert, takes all the pressure. You don't have to worry about how am I going to sell? You don't have to worry about how am I going to be entertaining? What if people don't find this interesting? You don't have to worry about any of that. And then the second piece where we really dive deep is in, okay, here's all these formats that are working well over on social media. Which one of those goes with your area of expertise? Which one of those goes with your natural way of delivering information? So long story short, kind of some main forms that we're seeing, reaction videos are one of them, right? So when you talk about trends, that's a really great way to do that. So to kind of bring it back full circle to your initial question there, reaction videos are number one, a really easy way to shoot a bunch of content, and two, also tie in on these other things that are trending, right? But when you do that, like you really have to make sure that you're not just picking a random trend that's in pop culture, but ideally it's something that's within your niche and something that's within your industry, right? Like if I said Alex Hormozi or Russell Brunson outside of the business world, right? Not a lot of people really do know who they are, but that's good. That's what I want. Those are the trends that I want to capitalize on because the people that are following them are my audience, right? So getting clear on what are the trends within your specific niche, who are the people doing it, and then what is your perspective on it, right? So it allows you to come in and stand on the shoulders of giants, so to speak, and then just naturally, hey, this is great advice and here's why, right? Or actually, I would do this differently and here's why. And I've even seen now some people doing reaction videos where they don't add anything. They're just, here's this clip above, and they're literally just watching the video. And I'm like, okay, that is one really easy way to create content. But either way, your audience is getting value, right? So I think capitalizing on people in the space, on AI is a big one right now, and how that ties into your industry, right? So just little things like that allow you to get traffic from somebody, people are already understanding this and already having that conversation in their mind, and then you come in and add to it.
Yeah, I love that. And you think about it, guys, we can either buy an audience, we can borrow an audience, or we can create an audience. And as you're creating your audience, it takes some time to do that organically. So I think borrowing like this, it's still free. Like you can go watch somebody else's video and do that reaction, and that's free. So that's huge, especially for brand new business owners. So let's talk about this as well. If you could share a little bit about what the biggest mistake that people make in content creation, and we can spend a little bit of time about how to avoid these mistakes. What's the biggest mistake that you keep hearing over and over? Like, why, guys, why are you doing this? It's like melting your face kind of mistake. That's the worst. So let's do that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the first and foremost is not doing it, right? Yeah. And putting it off. And I think content, no argument, right? I think everybody in a level of business realizes the power of content, and they probably just don't understand or aren't sure yet, because it does take some time to wrap your mind around it, right? How does this fit into my business? How does this fit into me, right? How do I find an easy way in for me? So I think that's probably the biggest thing, is like letting those limiting beliefs get in your way of actually doing it. And then the other thing is, it is kind of in a sense, a long play, because you don't have an immediate feedback loop always, especially if you're first starting out. You're going to be posting videos and getting, 20 views, 100 views, whatever, right? And you know this, you know how this goes, right? And then it's a snowball effect. So you have to find your way in to get over that mental hurdle of like not having those immediate wins or quick wins. And you've got to attach to something else, not the outcome, but the action of it. And by the way, the lack of quick wins doesn't mean it's not working. Right. Like like I said at the beginning, this was really the linchpin that changed everything for us. We didn't have data or views or engagement or followers to back this up. But immediately it was like people would get on sales calls with our team and, oh, I watched your video and like, this makes so much sense. I already know who you are. Can I talk to Giana? You get these like quantitative metrics coming back and you're like, okay, it is doing something. And some of our best performing videos in terms of conversions, had like 200 views. So that's the other thing, is remembering you don't need millions of followers and millions of views to make this work for you.
I think that's such a nice like relief, because sometimes we think we have to have 10,000 views to make it make any sense for business. But if you get that one relationship from that view, it was worth making the video. We're 100%. One relationship away from changing the rest of our life, from changing our business. And I think that is so key. So when we are trying to avoid some of these issues with content creation, I know a lot of people get in their head and they're just not wanting to go live, or they're not willing to open themselves up and share their expertise. What have you done to be able to help break down those barriers and strip away the pride and the frustration that people feel when they're first getting started? Say, hey, let's just do this. Let's help yourself. What do you do for those new people?
Yeah, I think having like a plan, because I think at least when I was getting started, the hardest thing for me was I would get up the next day and like, okay, today's shooting day. And I have no idea what I was going to talk about. And hours would go by and I've just been blabbing and I've got hours of footage that I'm never going to use. Right. So I think, and then not to mention all the tech side, right? How do I set up my phone? And this doesn't look good. And I don't like how I sound and all these other things. So I think like one, having a plan going into shooting day. And that's where a third-party perspective, like even if you're not hiring somebody to help you with your content, just having a conversation with maybe somebody that knows you well, or a client, hey, what do you get most value from me? Oh man, like on these coaching calls, you answer questions like this and that, like that's so beneficial for me. So then you go, okay, I'm actually pretty comfortable in coaching calls. Maybe I just have some people ask me questions and I answer questions, or you compile a bunch of frequently asked questions and you talk through that. So it's like your plan needs to overlap with something that's easy and natural for you to do. So that would be number one. And then number two is removing all the back end. And again, this is a big thing for me, because I would get this footage and then I was in charge of editing it, of figuring out how I was going to post it, writing the captions. And so I would watch it and I'd be like, I hate how I sound. I hate this. I hate that. And by the way, that hasn't changed. All my raw footage, I don't watch it. But that was one of the biggest game changers. The fact that I can hand it off to somebody and they know exactly what to do. I don't have to tell them what to do. They're going to edit it. And then it goes out, with my approval, but I'm seeing the edited version and I'm like, oh, wow. Because the edit is 10 times different than the raw footage. You think about your favorite movies. If you've ever seen like the director's cut, it's a totally different story, right?
Oh yeah.
Same footage. They didn't change anything. They didn't go back and reshoot anything. It's just the way that it's cut. So remembering like, hey, have a plan going in for exactly what you're going to do during the time you have blocked to shoot. And then also having a plan for the back end so that you don't have to be in charge of that.
Oh man, that's so true. So I used to teach theater in high school, and I had a film class that I taught. It was a very popular class. And that was one of the things about the back end that is so important, is to make sure that you come in with a shot list. Know exactly what you wanted in pre-production. And then in post, you're like, hey, did we get all the elements that we needed? And you can just compile it. And taking that off yourself as a business owner and saying, where can I go and have someone that does this editing professionally actually take that pressure off? It's huge. I only like 2 months ago got that pressure off myself. I was editing my own. I was like, I'm so bad at this, but at least I'm doing it. And then you finally pay someone to do it. And you're like, oh, wow, this is so much better. So grateful that I'm not the one doing that anymore.
Absolutely.
And if you could go and share a little bit more, like what is your favorite win in business? I would love to hear that story? What's you're like, man, this was so worth it. Like all the times, all the struggle, you're like, this made it worth it. Let's hear one of those stories.
Favorite win in business, just like overall brought big
It
picture.
could be something small, it could be something big, but the one that you're like, this was worth it. This is why I do what I do.
Oh man. Yeah. And I feel like it's like changes at every stage. I mean, obviously like having clients come through that have never really created content and that started very similar again to where I was, and they come in and they don't know what the plan is. They don't know how to get into it. They're bogged down mentally. There's one particular client in mind, Jamil, and she was like, she's a project manager, right? So she's super detailed and super analytical, and that was ultimately holding her back. And so when we could get her set up and she got those first round of videos in, and then she started getting feedback from people that were following her on social when this went out, I think that kind of thing is really cool, because that was obviously my journey. But yeah, I think nowadays personally would be probably stuff with the team. Like I'll give you most recent one. We've kind of changed our meeting cadence within our team. And we were struggling for a while because everybody's remote, right? So for me, coming from Orange Theory, my background there, one of the biggest things we had going for us was the unity of the team, but we could be face to face. We were all within 20 minutes of each other, right? So the camaraderie and the team unity that we had built there was the foundation of our success. And so now I'm like, how do I recreate that when everybody's all over the globe? And so we're doing this culture call meeting once a month. And so we're having each person that's running a department on our team, they do a presentation. And I told them, have fun with it, use GIFs, do whatever you want to do. No particular structure, just talk about what you've been focused on over the last 30 days, your wins and your learning opportunities, and then what you're going to do over the next 30 days. And to sit back and see that come together. I mean, there was stuff going on that like within different departments that they had built and facilitated and streamlined, and I didn't even know it was happening. So to see that and then them come back and be like, this was really cool. I was nervous to present, but like, it was really cool to see everybody come together and see what we're doing as a whole. So it's probably one of the most recent ones that we've had.
I love that. And having a culture meeting, you're giving them the opportunity to be creative as well, not just, hey, let's make sure that this is business. I hear, what is it? Princess Unikitty from Lego movie? Business. Want to make sure that you have some fun with it. And I think that's awesome. What a great win. Now, if we could go back and look over your business in the last 5 years, what would be one of the best learning opportunities that you had? Or like, this was a huge takeaway. It could have been like a big failure, could have been like a huge thing that just blew up on social. What was it that you're like, man, this was such a great learning opportunity? Last 5-6 years. Yeah.
Yeah. I think, I think it was like, for me, it was almost like I call it submission. Like, so when I was chasing a goal, right, and chasing a certain revenue goal, number one, realized that my identity was super tied up into that. Right. And so it created all this like pressure on me. I've got to do this and I've got to be more, and I'm not enough. And I'm not here because I didn't work 14 hours today, right? Whatever it was. And it was just all these stupid things that kept coming back to you. And I found that when I was finally able, like, and a lot of that is my faith, right? But when I was finally able to come to the realization that I got to let go of that and that my identity is not in that at all. And I just let go. Number one, it became a lot more fun. Right. And number two, things started just kind of coming together. So I think that's it. Is like working harder and being more is generally not the answer. Yes, do you have to be intentional? Do you have to be structured? Do you have to be really intentional with the time blocks that you set for yourself? 100%. But it's not that, I can do a lot in 2 hours and I can be just as efficient and productive in those 2 hours if I structure it right than I could in 10. So I think for me, it was just like letting go of that and just being, focusing on the action as more than focusing on the outcome.
I love that. And what's interesting is one of my favorite expressions is one that most people don't even say. It's, I like to go work smarter so that I can go harder. Right. Yeah. A lot of people are like, hey, I don't want to work hard. You're like, actually, I really enjoy working hard, but I want to work efficiently as well. And it sounds like what you're doing is, instead of saying, I'm going to work 10 hours, just kind of lollygagging and doing a little bit, no real structure. If you can compress that into 2 or 3 hours or even 4 hours, man, that is so much more worth it, because you have more fulfillment. You're more excited. You're like, man, this was so worth the energy that you put into it. Because a lot of times, guys, this is something I heard from my coach. He said, time is not the thing that's valuable. It's the energy you put into the time. That's where the value is. And time's going to keep going whether you put the energy or not. But it
Yeah.
sounds like, Gianna, you're able to craft your plans so that the energy you're putting into those hours is extremely valuable and efficient. So let's talk about this. If you were able to talk to yourself 5 years ago, you're like, hey, little Gianna, what encouragement would you give her talking to yourself 5 years ago that you're like, man, I wish I would have known this, do this.
Yeah. Yeah. I think number one is definitely relax, but number two is like, it's never going to be perfect. And so I think one of the traps that I fell into early on was okay, if I put out a beautiful website and I put this thing out on social, it's just going to come flocking in as long as the product is good and as long as this and that. And it's funny, I'm reading Elon Musk's biography right now. And his big thing is like, if the product is great, that's all you need. Don't worry about marketing and sales. And that's 100% where I disagree. I get it. And granted, he's building, Tesla and rockets. That's a little bit different than what we do. I get that. But for us, it was the marketing and the sales. So I really had to learn. It was like, go learn those skills, persuasion, communication, like sales, all of that, which I think is really just the same. It's all branches of the exact same thing, which is learning persuasion, communication. Yeah. And that's all content is as well, by the way. So I think like for me, it was like, stop focusing on, the beautiful branding and the website and how this looks and how that looks, and focus on learning these skills. And when you learn the skills, right, it's kind of like in a football game, the athletes are not looking at the scoreboard 24/7, right? They're not every second of the game. They're not looking at the scoreboard. They're focused on the play in front of them, on the next play that they need to make. And when you focus on that, the scoreboard takes care of itself, right? So for me, it was like, go learn the skills and focus on that, and not on the outcome.
I love that. And what's cool is if you focus on the skills, you have control, because you can say, who is it that does this at the level that I want to do it? And then you go model and mimic what they're doing, rather than, oh, I wish I could be like those guys, and you don't do anything. Like focusing on skills, we absolutely can break it down. Like, well, how did he get that result? Now let's break it apart. I love how you do that in a lot of your videos. You'll recognize, here's the trend, here's the patterns you're recognizing. And then from those patterns, you start to break it down. You're like, now what's something that's applicable that I can use, that my audience can use? So when we're talking about value creation, I love this. What is the easiest way, or one of the simplest patterns that you've been able to recognize to say, this is what's going to create value for your audience? Let's talk about that.
Yeah. And again, I think like that goes back to what we're talking like overcomplicating content, right? And overcomplicating content creation. I think a lot of times people are like, is this going to be valuable? Like, how do I create the value? How do I do, but how does that connect to a sale? And I think if you just focus on solving the problems that, your audience has, and there's a lot of different ways to do this, right? There's the type of person that is on the hero's journey. So maybe your business was something that you struggled with, and you eventually came up with a solution and found your way back through that. And now you're going back and teaching other people that are struggling with the same problem you used to have, right? So that's one way. And I think the hardest thing there is like, put your mind back to the questions you had and the words you used and how you describe those things when you were figuring it out. The language you use now is completely different because you figured out the solution to the problem. But your audience, they're not there yet. So you have to put yourself back in those shoes and go, okay, what were the questions I have? And what were the things I was struggling with? And make content on that.
I love that. You think about it, that's something that gives us empathy, because when we're in the middle of that muck, that message is not necessarily clear. But after we've gotten through, we've cleaned up, we're like, all right, how could I avoid that next time?
Yeah. Yeah.
Those are some great takeaways. But if we don't have the vulnerability to say, I was in the mud a little while ago, here's how I got out, then somebody else is going to end up in the mud as well. So what's something that you would say is absolutely essential in content creation that most people just don't do?
Well, in the business world, I think it probably is in-depth educational content as it comes to like long form stuff. I think a lot of times people are afraid, they're like, this is boring. Like this isn't going to get, and it's not, it's the stuff that does not get hundreds of millions of views. Right. So, but it is the stuff that your people need. And it's probably like, if you look back again on your journey, right, I bet there's somebody that you were following who like had a really in-depth stuff, and they would just show you, and it was nothing fancy. There was probably no fancy edits to it, right? Maybe it was just a screen share, but they were like, hey, this is how we do this. Let me walk you through it. right? And so I think that kind of content is really important, and people aren't doing it either because they feel like they need to be entertaining and it's not getting the views, or B, and which just means they're optimizing for the wrong things, right? Or B, they're like, I can't give this away. Like, this is what I sell, but it's actually the opposite, right? You want to give that away, and you want to, if someone can go and take that and get a quick win from your content, like, number one, they're going to come back to you and that trust is there. They're like, oh, this works. I already implemented your free stuff and this works, right? Or the second thing is they're like, I don't want to do this myself. I need your help, or I want you to do it for me, right? So I think it's just like not being afraid to give that away.
And then you're going up the value ladder, because if you're giving them free content, you're like, all right, this works. You already know, like, and trust me. Now it's, what's the next step? If they want to expand their business at some point, they don't want to do it themselves. Mm-hmm. That's very common, right? Maybe at the beginning, you don't have a lot of extra ad spend, or you don't have any money at the very beginning to spend on this. Maybe you're like, I'm going to do it myself. But at some point in your business, as it grows, you're like, I'm going to outsource that. And that's when your content creation, that's when all this value that you've created for years with them, maybe even months, I don't know, but years, is starting to have them paying top of mind. So what is one way that you found to make sure that your content is in alignment with your brand? Because I think sometimes there's this push to say, well, let's just do this trend and then this trend and this trend. And then when you're all over the place, you're nowhere.
Yeah.
So how do you focus in on that brand and that niche?
That's such a good point. I think number one, like anything, you got to have it defined, right? So if you don't have it on paper, you might have elements of it up here in your head, but then you're going to get into something, you're going to see a shiny object, you're going to see a trend, you're going to see this worked really well for so-and-so, and you're going to want to do it. But if you've got this defined, you can go back and you say, okay, these are our core values. This doesn't fit with our core values. We're not going to do it.
Yeah.
You know? And then again, I think also like the key theme here is simplify. You know, it depends, right? Like, obviously the size of your company depends on this, right? And if you've got other people that are going to be on camera and are the voice of the brand as well, that's a little bit different. But for most founder-led businesses, right, you are the brand, especially at the beginning. So it's not something, you just have to get clear on, how do I want to show up? What are my core values? What are we going to, what's yes falls in line with these core values, and what is an absolute no? Like, this is not anything we want to be represented by. And if you have that, then you've got your guardrails, but then you just have to go show up on camera, because the way that you authentically show up will become the brand for you as well. So I think just having it defined, and then, you know, as your team grows, making sure that they're on board with that as well.
I think that's great advice. And one of the things I love about that is you're putting up these guardrails. You're saying, oh, I crossed the line there. I need to make sure I'm staying here. And sometimes we don't know where that line is until we get some feedback from our audience. Yeah. So maybe if you could go and tap into your audience, what do you do to make sure that you're doing maybe user-generated content, or something that you're like, hey, this is exactly a question that someone asked me. What are you doing to engage with your audience so that they feel like they're part of the contribution?
Yeah. And I think that's different for every business, right? And it's going to also be dependent on the person that's getting on camera. Like, some people are a lot more engaging, or like a lot more interactive is the word that I'm looking for, right? So you could have a Q&A, hey, ask me anything, right? I've seen people do that as well, where you just submit the questions. You could be taking things from conversations that you're having with clients throughout the day, and just making it in a relatable way of like, all right, I did get this question 4 times over the last 30 days on a coaching call, right? And here's what it is. And also telling stories, like if you've got something where maybe there is a client that you're working through it, telling that story, and you don't have to obviously give any information about who that client is, right? But hey, I had a client, they came on board, they were really struggling with this. We were talking through some of these things, and normally I would, and you could be vulnerable here too, like normally I would do blah, 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 but that didn't work for this particular person because of this. So here's actually the journey that we took them on. So just doing things like that not only grounds you and makes you relatable, but also like pulls in your audience.
Yeah, I think that's great, because anytime you're sharing a story, that's what sells. It's not the facts, the figures. It's here's the personal connection. Like my word for this year is guanxi in Mandarin, which means connection and relationships. And if we are able to improve our relationships and make them more in-depth with our customers so they become raving fans.
Yeah.
That's a massive difference than just someone that had a transaction with us one time.
So true. And I think that's content, really. I mean, it's like, if we go back to, I won't even say it's old school, right? But the traditional ways of building a business is like we go to networking meetings and we meet people, and over the course of 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 conversations, right? Or like referrals or whatever it is. Well, that's all you're doing with content. It's just highly leveraged. So now instead of me being only to be able to speak to the 30 people in the room, and maybe one of those people is my actual target market, right? Or they're in the spot where they would need something that I do or need something that I solve in my content. Now I can create that video once and hundreds of thousands of people can see it.
And I love that, because when we really think about business, there's such a massive difference from someone that's self-employed and someone that's actually a business owner. And the key is that leverage, that system.
Yeah.
So when you are helping someone that's going from a self-employed mindset saying, well, I got to do everything by myself. I'm going to film my own videos. I'm going to edit my own things. I'm going to make sure that all of it's my own touch, to someone that finally systemizes it, maybe even outsources all these different elements. What is that customer journey like for you to help someone shift in their mindset from I'm going to be a self-employed doing it all myself to now I'm finally a business owner?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it's one of the key learnings for me too, is like realize this probably over the last 8 months or so. It's like that doesn't go away just because, and I'm the systems person, right? Like I love systems. Everything we do is super dialed in on that. And that was ultimately kind of the foundations of what we built. But for me, so I never struggled with, the idea of like artist versus business owner, right? The artist is the person that starts this business around something that they love doing, and they're not the business owner, right? They love doing the thing that is the business, but they don't love all the other pieces of it. So I never really struggled with that. I always came in the other way around. But I think it's what your goal is. If your goal is, hey, I truly love doing this thing and I started a business around it because I love it, then hire somebody to do all the things that you don't want to do around the business, right? If your goal is really to, scale to whatever amount and build this team and do all these things, then yeah, you got to start looking at like, what are the things that are not only taking my time, but taking the most energy from right now that I'm not good at and that I don't enjoy doing. Right. And I think when you finally give yourself permission, that's really ultimately what it comes down to, right? Is you got to give yourself permission to let go of that. And sure, when you first delegate it out or you give it to somebody else, are there going to be mistakes? Are there going to be things that are done 7 out of 10 where you could be 10 out of 10? Yeah. But what were you able to do with that additional time? Were you able to spend more time with your family? Were you able to go and spend more time with a client that needed you, right? Like, where is that other needle mover for you that you're now freed up from? Because ultimately what you're doing when you hold on to that stuff is you're no longer able to be of impact to others. The more stuff you put on your shoulders, the less you can go and pour into others, right? So you've got to like just really be smart about what are those things and how can I get them off my plate, and then like give yourself permission that, yeah, okay, this may not be 10 out of 10 like I would do it, but 7 out of 10 is good enough, and it's still going to get results that we need.
And if we can play with that math for a second, guys, I love this idea. If it's like 7 out of 10, it's pretty good. If you have multiple people that are giving 7 out of 10 and you're only one and you were able to do 10 out of 10, it only takes 2 people and they're doing, 14 out of 10. And then you get a couple more, like 21 out of 10. You're like, wow, they're so much more efficient than you could be by yourself.
Yeah.
And that little mindset shift, being able to leverage other people's everything, right? Their time, their money, their assets, all these different things. If you are struggling to grow in your business, actually look back at yourself and say, what is it that I know I'm the best at and that I enjoy doing? Maybe that's where you focus your time in your business, and all that other stuff, find someone, because there are some people that love doing bookkeeping. I'm not that person.
Yeah.
There's some people that love doing taxes. I'm not that person. So you find the people that are the key players. And then you say, we're going to give you that creative opportunity to take this and run with it.
Yeah.
So one of the other things that I think is really key to understanding content creation is simplification, like what you said. And then as you're building your brand, having the right language going all the way through it so that you can connect with the people. So one of the things I'd love to hear your take on is, how do you make sure that you're crafting your scripts in your videos, or even the types of questions, to make sure that you're speaking directly to the target market and the audience rather than to everybody? Because if you talk to everyone, you're not going to get to anybody. So you want to talk to a specific niche. How do you craft that language?
Yeah, again, and one of the first things we do is we create basically an avatar roadmap that becomes the foundation of everything we do with a client. And this is super in depth. It talks about, the things we're all familiar with, right? Like, oh, it's this demographic, this age group, blah, blah, blah. But it's more about the psychographics. This is what they want. But this is like, we have primary desires, we have secondary desires, right? And it's also like, think of human nature. We say we want this thing, but really we want this thing, right? So it's like getting inside of the mind of the person you're trying to reach on that level first, because then you just run everything and filter everything through that. Another thing that we've started doing is creating a marketing. So take it a step further, creating a marketing thesis. This is basically like an argument. We honestly, like, it's funny. We're going to be bringing a lot more of this into what we do, but the short execution answer is frameworks. So we've got story frameworks, and some of these might resonate better with certain clients, and they may like this better, and they may have a story that fits into this framework. And then it's scripting frameworks, it's hook frameworks, it's persuasive copywriting for all these different things, right? And a lot of stuff that we're taking from is apologetics, right? Which is defense of something. It's basically taking a logical argument and then breaking it down. But it always starts with meeting people where they're at, right? So what do they ultimately believe? What's the foundation of their belief? Where are they at? I have to start my argument there. And you're doing the exact same thing when it comes to content, but you can't do that until you get inside that person's head to know where they're really starting. And so whether you've been on that journey yourself, or you just know that this is a target market that you're solving, making sure you're not using doctor speak, right? Again, this is the language you would be using because you already know the solution to the problem. They're not talking about it that way. And I think one of the easiest ways to do this is go, okay, well, if this person was hanging out on a Saturday with their brother that they haven't seen in a while, and their brother's asking them, how's business? How are things? What are they saying? What's the language they're using? That is how your content should start. And then from there, you can take them into anything you want, right? But if you meet them where they're at in the conversation that they're already having and using the language they're having, which is not an easy thing to do when you're in, like you're inside the box all day long, right? You can't read the label on the other side. Like, you're just so inundated with this stuff. It makes so much sense to you, right? Your paradigm has already been shifted, and it's very hard to go back. So it's just, you just have to be really careful and go, wait a minute, am I using kind of like corporate speak or doctor speak, or am I using like high level stuff that they're not describing it this way? And I think just running your scripts through that lens is super helpful.
Yeah, that's a great way to think about it. Meeting them at their beliefs, and then is the language you're using actually something that they would say, and something that would already be fitting into their conversation? Because I think part of this is we want to make sure that our content's shareable. It's something that's understandable and immediately useful. That's really where value, my friend Steve Larson says this, he's like, value is usefulness. If you have a problem that's not useful that you solve, not very many people are going to care about it. But if you have a useful problem, even if some of the video isn't as pretty, because it's useful, people are like, oh man, this solves my problem so well. You got to check it out.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. And to give you a concrete example of this too, I think when we were starting out, like, I was doing so much in our marketing and in our content around selling the idea of content and why you need content and how content can generate revenue, right? And what I realized was that was bringing in the wrong people, because the conversation at that level, that was not necessarily the people that were best suited for our systems. We wanted people that were already there, that maybe had other channels of attribution, had already scaled a business. They already believed in the power of content and they knew they needed it, but their struggle was, how do I systemize this? How do I hire for it? Right? Totally different conversation. And so once we kind of started shifting into that, that's where things really started to change for us too. So not only making sure that you're meeting people where they're at, but you're meeting the right person where they're at as well.
Love that. And that really comes down to recognizing who you're bringing in and seeing, is this the ideal client? And then when you're like, oh, that's not. And one of the ways I do this in my short-term rental business is when I have a bad client, I was like, what was it that brought them in? And then I was like, how do I not have that happen again? Sometimes it's raising your prices. Like, that's been one of the easier ways to get people that don't actually appreciate your property to not book it, is you do a little price ceiling, and you're like, all right, that will take some of those people out. But your messaging, the more clear it is, the easier it is to find the right person. So to wrap up here, what was a question that I didn't ask that you wish I had asked, and a story maybe attached to it?
Ooh, that's a good one. Yeah, I think I don't know. That's a good, you covered quite a bit of ground. Maybe just the simplest way to get started, right? If this is brand new, if you haven't really been producing content, I think one of the most powerful answers I can give to that is take your iPhone, take your Android, make a list of 10 frequently asked questions that you get from people, and then just answer that. And if that answer for you takes 60 seconds, if that answer for you takes 20 minutes, whatever it is, right? And if you know it's going to be a 60-second answer, film it vertically on your phone and it becomes a short form video, a reel or whatever. And just throw it up on Instagram. Use the native captions on Instagram and just post it. Don't worry about it. If it's a little bit longer, you know it's going to be longer, film it in horizontal and it becomes a YouTube video. And again, don't think about it. Just write the description. This is what the video is about. Throw it up on YouTube and see what kind of feedback you get, right? But committing to that first action, all right, 10 questions, I'm going to answer them. I'm going to post it no matter what the video looks like. I think that is key. And when I started doing that, that's when things really, in our first videos, you know, even now we're changing directions, right? It's always this pivot and always like, we realize some of the content we've been posting over the last 60 days, I was like, this is not necessarily in line with the brand that I want to be creating or necessarily in line with my zone of genius. We're going to make this pivot, right? So having those continual conversations, but also realizing like that never ends. So you have to start somewhere and you can't have those conversations to dial and tweak until you start. So just remove that, say, I'm going to do my 10 questions. I'm going to post it. It is what it is. We'll get feedback and iterate on the next round.
I love that. I'm so glad that I didn't ask you that question and you were able to share it. So good. Thank you so much. Now, how do people find you on social media? How do they keep connected with you? Because man, I appreciate you and I want to make sure that more people get to know you because you're such a force when it comes to content creation. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. Probably top 2 platforms, Instagram should just be, I think it's Giana Cambria 91, but if you just type in Giana Cambria, it'll come up. And then the other one is Giana Cambria on YouTube as well. We put out a ton of content on both of those channels.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you. And guys, if you want more of this leveling up content, I'm here every single Thursday in the morning. So thankful. And we have another great person coming up right after this, but man, so excited to have you on today. Giana, thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Brigham. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Hey, God bless. You take care.
Take care.